What's up? I'm Coach Dan Blewett. I'm a former pro pitcher and baseball academy owner. In today's video, we're going to talk about pitching speeds by age. So we're going to break down everything from 8 all the way up to 18 and, what is low, what is average throwing velocity, what is high pitching velocity, and what you can expect to gain each year. We'll talk about all about pitching velocity in today's video. All right, so if you're new here, I'm Coach Dan. Check out the links in the description below. You'll find my online pitching courses, my 3 baseball books, and more links to free pitching development checklists, all sorts of free resources that you can get if you want to be the best pitcher you can be. So first thing, let's jump into this video about pitching speeds by age. The first thing to understand is the number one age-related factor in how hard a player throws is their developmental age. And what does that mean? Developmental age is how physically developed a player is relative to his biological age. Now, that's a mouthful, but it basically just means, look, there are 13-year-olds who are 6'1" and 175 pounds, and there are 13-year-olds who are 5'1" and 96 pounds. We all know this. So the problem is, if you look at your team, and if you're a parent or you're a player, you're a coach, understand that if you sorted your players by who's physically biggest, and not always biggest, but just by developed, like you could have really fast twitch, almost like hardened, more like grown-up muscles more than little kid muscles, that's really going to rank most of the physical skills, who's fastest, who hits the ball the farthest, and who throws the fastest. So understand, you cannot outrun your developmental age. We all know that the kids that sign, for Division I schools at age 15 or 16, the kids that sign really, really early, they're almost always the ones who are just the most physically developed. Obviously, they're really great players too, but if you're really physically developed, so you look like an 18-year-old when you're 15 versus looking like a 13-year-old when you're 15, that makes a massive difference. So understand that you cannot outrun your developmental age. So just understand that velocity development is a slow process and you have to take your time and you can't rush it. That's how you get hurt, when you rush it. So hardworking players, that means if you're doing the right things, you're being well coached, you're doing good quality training, you can typically expect to gain 3 to 4 miles per hour per year. So if you're 8 and you play all the way up until you're 18, then hopefully going to college, that's 11 years of training. If you had 3 or 4 miles per hour per year, that's 33 to 44 miles per hour. So if you start off throwing 50, that's going to put you well into the mid 80s by the time you're an 18-year-old. So understand that even though that is like a linear thing, like 3 to 4 miles per year, if it was consistent, would take you from 55 to 90. But it's in reality not going to be that simple. You're going to gain 7 miles per hour one year. You're going to gain 0 one year. You're going to have a little minor injury and you're going to go down. Your mechanics are going to be weird. You're going to lose a couple miles per hour. Then next year, you're going to jump back up. So understand that in real life, your velocity curve, your route from today to 90 miles per hour is not going to be a nice clean line. It's going to be a very messy up and down line, exactly like mine was, exactly like every player that I've ever worked with was. You cannot predict when you hit your growth spurts. When you do hit your growth spurts, you'll have big jumps. You might gain 5, 6, 7, sometimes 10 miles per hour in a year because you grew 20 pounds, you shot up 4 inches, and your mechanics got better, and you got stronger in the weight room. So that year, you might get a 10 spot. And then the next 2 years, you might get 1 mile per hour combined. It's just going to be this waiting game, and you can't outpace your body, and you can't outpace puberty and the growth and all that sort of stuff. As we jump into these velocities now, understand that I've put 4 categories. I put like below average, so low, average, and then above average and outlier. So outliers, statistically are at the very high and low end, right? They're the extreme examples. So in this, I put an example as 2%. So I'm going to tell you basically when you see a player who throws like 80 miles per hour at age 14, that's an outlier. That's not a normal kid. That's a very exceptional 1 out of 50 players might throw that hard. So that's kind of how I'm kind of breaking this down. And this is not completely scientific. This is from my observation as a pitching guy who's coached a lot of players and watched a lot of youth baseball over the years. So ages 8 to 9, how hard should an 8-year-old throw as a pitcher? Number 1, it does not matter. Number 2, they just need to be learning to love the game and really have fun and just get comfortable with it. So please, if you're a parent or you're a player, do not spend 1 minute thinking about your velocity at 8 and 9. At ages 10 and 11, it still does not matter. This is the range that most players pitch in. But again, 10-year-olds are tiny little people. They're kids. They're not mini grown-ups. Remember, kids are not miniature grown-ups. So the things they can do are just very limited. They're not going to be able to produce that much force. So most kids at 10, 11 throw in the 40s, some sneak into the 50s. And the ones who are throwing in the 50s are usually just the bigger kids who really, as a 10-year-old, they're more like a 13-year-old or they're more like a 12-year-old. So remember, at those ages, really just focus on fun, building the fundamentals, work on their mechanics. Do not bring out the radar gun. It does not matter. I tell parents this all the time when they email me. Age 12 still doesn't matter much, but here's some of the breakdown. We'll start from this age. So if you're below 55, that's probably on the low end. Average, probably like mid 50s into the right around 60. If you're in the 60s consistently creeping up into the mid 60s, that's definitely high for your age. That's pretty hard. And then outliers at that age are going to be in the upper 60s or higher. Again, the outliers here are going to be the 12-year-olds that really look like they're 14 or 15. And that's normal. That's how they can generate that kind of speed. When you have whatever a typical 12-year-old looks like in your head, it's probably like 5'3" and 100 pounds. They can only produce so much force. That's why you've never seen a kid who's 5'1" and 100 pounds throw 90 miles per hour. It's just not physically possible. So understand that, again, most 12-year-olds who are of that sort of size, they're going to throw in the mid 50s, something like that. Age 13, this is where most players start to break into the 60s. So if they're below that they're probably on the low end. Average 61 to 64, high 65 to 70, outlier 70 plus. And understand, these charts that I've made up, they're going to follow this trend, 3 to 4 miles per hour for every year. Age 14, low end, in the low 60s. Players of this age should be striving to get into the 70s. Again, you can't rush your development, but that's the goal. If you start to see 70s at age 14, you're in a pretty good spot. Because again, if you add 15 more miles per hour in your high school career, which is 3 to 4 miles per hour per year, you're going to be in great shape, right? You'll be a mid 80s pitcher one day. So if you're sneaking into the 70s at age 14, you're in great shape. If you're close to 80, which happens, but is very rare, then obviously you're way ahead of the game. At age 50, this is where you start to see most players. At age 15, this is where you start to see most players, or the better players, start to crack the 80 mile per hour milestone, that barrier. 80 is hard. People talk all the time about how, 90 poo, like 90's not fast anymore. If you watch the College World Series this year, I'm sure you saw, just as I did, lots and lots of high-level Division I pitchers throwing in the high 80s. Not everyone in college baseball is throwing in the 90s, especially not the mid-90s. It's still really, really fast. So this 80 mile per hour barrier is an important one, and it's really hard to break that barrier when you're a kid who's 140 pounds, which is what most 15-year-olds are. So again, most players are cracking the 70s. The best players are starting to crack the 80s at age 15. At 16, this is one of the biggest changes where kids have jumped. Most boys have hit that stage of puberty where they become more like a man and less like a boy. They sprout up, they're 6 foot all of a sudden, they're 6'1", they're 6'2", and they're starting to pack on some frame, right? Or some muscle to their frame. At age 15, most kids are still pretty wiry, even if they're starting to grow. At age 16, they start to fill out a little bit, but there's still a lot of kids who are still really wiry and thin. So this is where you see kids who are more physically developed start to get into that outlier zone of in the mid 80s, even to the upper 80s. This is where you start to see some of the best recruits in the country are throwing in the 90s at this point. And really, if you look at those kids' bodies, they're more like 18-year-olds in a 16-year-old's body. So just remember, whatever you think the standard model 16-year-old is, right? Whatever, if you're build a 16-year-old mannequin in a factory, I'd say a standard 16-year-old is 5'10" and 155 pounds. It's not that big of a human. But again, if your son is 6'4" and 225 pounds, and they have good mechanics and they're pretty explosive, yeah, they might be throwing in the mid 80s to close to 90. So again, remember that developmental age plays a really big role, much more than biological age, and you can't speed that process up. Some kids are just bigger bodied than others. At age 17, this is definitely where you start to see kids who are starting again look like men, and that's where they start to crack the 90 mile per hour milestone. These kids are, going to sign with some of the better schools at this point. Junior year is your big recruiting year. And for everyone else, you're breaking into the high 70s. You're starting to creep towards 80. This is a normal progression. For me, I pitched at 91, 94 in my pro career. I was barely breaking 80 as a high school senior because I had some injuries and some setbacks. I was probably throwing 80 around 14 or 15. But then, again, with your curve not being clean and linear, I was a really hard thrower at 14, 15. And then I hurt my elbow. I had a partial UCL tear. And I threw 80 for pretty much the rest of my high school career. I topped at like 83 once in a while. So understand that this is still not easy to get to that 90 mile per hour milestone, especially as a high schooler. And, at age 18, this is definitely where kids continue to they continue to bulk up more. They continue to harden more. They continue to refine their mechanics, and they have better body control too. And that's another big thing. As kids hit that 16, 17, 18, they can make a lot more adjustments to their mechanics and really start to refine their mechanics and squeeze out some more velocity. Whereas when you're 14, 15, you don't have great body control. You're still learning how to pitch. You're still learning how to, develop power and go down the mountain smoothly. So as you start to hit 16, 17, 18, you can do a lot more things athletically. And that's also where more velocity gains come from, not just being physically bigger and stronger and more explosive. So just understanding that the body control an 18-year-old is significantly better than a 16-year-old or a 15-year-old or a 14-year-old. And that body control is what allows them to really make these fine adjustments that pitching coaches will ask them to make to squeeze more out of their body. So that's important to understand as well. The other thing I want to mention is that outliers are not normal. So what I see this all the time where a kid is on Instagram, they're feeling good about themselves, and then suddenly they see some kid from some other state who throws like 95 miles per hour at age 16. That is not normal. And the fact that kid does it is amazing, great for them. I'm sure they've worked hard for it, but it's not normal. So make sure you understand when I say outliers, that outliers are not the standard to hold yourself to. Just because some kid in Missouri throws 97 miles per hour as a high school sophomore doesn't mean that you have to do that to be good. Most D1 college pitchers pitching in the College World Series, again, don't throw 97 miles per hour. You will see 14-year-olds throwing 92, 15-year-olds throwing 94, 16-year-olds throwing 96, and high school seniors throwing 100 now. That is not normal. It's wonderful for them, but understand that outliers are not the standard to hold yourself to. So it's still exceptional to throw 85 miles per hour as a high school player. I didn't throw that hard when I was a high school senior. It's still exceptional to do that. And you don't have to throw 92 miles per hour to play in college. You just don't. So just understand that outliers are not the standard. So a couple things just to remember. I just want to kind of summarize some of the takeaways about pitching velocity here. There's a lot of factors that influence this. I know a lot of parents and players are confused, like, hey, I think I'm pretty good. Why do I only throw 68 or 76 or 82? Like, why can't I get, as much velocity as some other kids? There's a lot of innate factors like overall strength and explosiveness, your athleticism, your muscle fiber type. Some people are naturally more explosive than others. Obviously, your pitching mechanics, but also your height, your limb length, your weight, right? I'm 6 foot. My wingspan is, I think, 6'2" or 6'3", and I have like reasonably big hands. So those things help me as a 6 foot person be a little more like a 6'2", 6'3" person. So like my arm length, it's helpful, right? So you can be built to be a pitcher. And if you have a really long torso and really short legs and you're 5'6", it's going to be harder for you to throw as hard as someone like I could. And it's going to be hard for me to throw as hard as someone who's 6'4" and has a 6'7" wingspan, right? So those are all things that are just going to influence and put one person ahead of another if they work just as hard and put in just as much practice. The other things are, how much do you throw? I loved throwing, loved it to death. I still love it. And you didn't have to tell me to go out in the backyard and throw for 2 hours in the afternoon. I just would go throw rocks at trees. I'd throw a tennis ball against a wall. Like, I was always throwing. So how often a player throws is important. It's not to say that more is always better, because it's not. But again, like, you have to get the reps in, just like if you're a weightlifter or you're a sprinter. You're not going to be the world's fastest sprinter if you don't sprint very often, right? So intensity when throwing is another important thing. That's not to say you should always throw your hardest, because you definitely should not. But mental intensity. Are you really focused on your mechanics? Are you really focused on what you're doing on your craft? Arm care, strengthening. Like, I did arm care all the time, 3, 4, 5 days a week from college on. And that really helped strengthen my rotator cuff. It helped keep me healthier and also helped me throw harder, right? I got a couple miles per hour from that. So your arm care regimen is really important. And your overall conditioning. I know distance running gets a lot of hate, but I think 1 to 2 distance runs a week is good. I think sprinting is great. And I think strength training is so important, right? So all those things together, I don't think you need just one single one. I think never running is not good. I think running is an important part of your training regimen. It helps build, besides physical toughness and durability and some good lungs, it also helps build some mental toughness and some mental endurance. Because when it's 100 degrees out and you're pitching, it's the 7th inning and it's really hot, some of those distance runs help you a little bit. So anyway, these are all some of the factors that help influence what is going to get, or what you're going to get and squeeze out of your body velocity wise. So here are some of the takeaways. So understand that when you go down this chart that I've given you of pitching speeds by age, it doesn't really matter where you fall. If you want to say, okay, I'm behind or I'm ahead, it doesn't really matter, because at the end of the day, you can only do as much as you can do. So you can audit yourself and say, how hard am I working? Am I focusing enough? Am I in the weight room enough? Am I doing enough arm care? What else can I do with my mechanics? Those are good questions to ask. So if you see, hey, I'm on the low end of the scale, maybe that's a good kick in the pants for you to work a little harder. But at the end of the day, if you feel like, I've done everything I can, I'm working really hard, I'm trying to balance everything with school, and I feel like I'm as good as a player as I possibly could be, then hey, be proud of where you're at and just understand that it's going to take time. And you might be in the low end today. I've seen a lot of players who were in the low end at age 14, who were in the high end at age 16. So again, it's not a linear progression. So if you're in the low end today and you think, well, if I only gain 3 or 4 miles per hour over the next couple of years, I'm not going to be good enough to play in college. You might gain 8 in 1 year because you hit puberty, you shoot up in height, everything clicks mechanically, your body control gets better, and things just like everything takes off at once. I've seen it many, many times. So understand that this is a marathon where just the person who's ahead today, they might stay ahead for a long time. That definitely happens. Like you think of some of these really high level athletes, like LeBron James was a world-class basketball player in high school. And obviously he's become he's one of the best basketball players who ever lived, right? He was ahead then and he's ahead now. But there's lots of stories that are the opposite, where players didn't get a scholarship to play in college. I didn't. And then they really blossom later on. So you can be a late bloomer. You can be an early bloomer. The only thing that really matters is that you bloom, okay? So hopefully today's video on pitching velocity, broken down by the different ages, hopefully it was helpful. Obviously in baseball, everyone wants to make it to the next level, but be sure to enjoy the level that you're at. Have fun with your teammates. Don't look only to the future. Be sure to be present and enjoy your career today, because you never know how much you'll get, right? So as long as you're having fun today, you're working hard, and you're enjoying your teammates, you're enjoying the competition, then things will work out the way they want to work out. All right. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the description below. Check out my online courses and my books that help support the channel, and I really appreciate it. And I'll see you here in the next video.